Subcommittee on Europe will come to order. The purpose of this hearing is to provide members with an informed perspective of U.S. policy toward NATO and an opportunity to discuss NATO's trajectory in advance of the June summit in The Hague. And now recognize myself in an opening statement. The Hague will be focused on funding for NATO. This first chart, and would you put it up, blow it up as much as you can, shows the NATO nations. They are listed top to bottom by GDP. They are listed on the right side by the percentage that they provide. Can you blow that more? Blow that up. Okay, so I want to. I do not. So I want to just come to this. Of course, U.S. is at the top, with almost $29 trillion GDP. You go down to Germany, UK, France, Italy, Canada, and Spain. Down here, you've got the frontline countries, you've got Lithuania, you've got Latvia, you've got Estonia. Some of the Balkan countries are down below. The ones I want to point out, the summit tells us they're going to be going above 3% somewhere. So I want to point out right here, we have about the major economies in NATO, specifically France, Italy, and Canada, that are well below, Italy, Canada, and Spain, that are well below the current 2% commitment. These are major economies. This is a major change that needs to happen at the summit. This slide. Just a couple comparisons. This compares Poland to everyone else on the eastern flank. The eastern flank being defined as Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, Bulgaria, and Hungary. Poland has a GDP of about $840 billion. Eastern flank is 90. Those are not dissimilar. The defense budgets are quite a bit dissimilar. The percentage of Poland is at over 4% currently and going higher. The eastern flank is at 2.36 and going higher, and it's already committed to go higher. Next slide. One more to give you an idea of where the funding in NATO stands. This is Germany versus the eastern flank. So we've added Poland to the east of Germany. Germany has 4.6, eastern flank has 1.7. Here the defense budgets, look at this. The eastern flank is providing a higher percentage than Germany is. So my point in all of these three slides is there is work to do in the summit later this month. And I know that people make commitments. What you saw for 2024, the last year we had a full year's funding toward NATO. That is a major problem that I wanted to highlight. We've got other issues in this reason. That's the one that I wanted to start with. The first thing we have to start with is everyone pulling their weight in NATO. That you go back. I recognize ranking member.
Mr. Chairman, can I make a question for our teacher? Those are important charts that you just presented. Jake, so that we look at them here. And should be that difficult for the staff.
We do that. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Custer. We'll do that. Mr. Keith.
Good. Go. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this important hearing today. I want to thank our witnesses for their participation in today's hearing. When 75 years ago, in World War II, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization was established to forge a safe, secure, and prosperous transatlantic alliance. From its inception, NATO funding got and its Article 5 principle of collective defense have been underpinning our national security and that our European powers as well. We saw the next after 9/11 when our allies sacrificed treasure and blood in our defense. NATO's necessity came into full view in February of 2022 when the Russian Federation initiated a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. 17 days NATO was marshaled billions of dollars in military support to the Ukrainians who have funded the line of freedom at great human cost. During the 2024 Washington Summit, support of Ukraine, the NATO was clear as allies agreed that Russia remains the significant direct threat to security of the alliance. Just 1 year later, the Russian threat to NATO remains all present, all more real. At that time, NATO allies also agreed to increase defense spending to build the alliance terms. Countries like Poland and the Baltic states have well exceeded the 2% mark, while others, like the United Kingdom and Germany, have committed to pass legislation to ensure their defense spending increases in accordance with the alliance's requirements. Meanwhile, other countries have lagged behind the 2% mark, and it's absolutely imperative that all allies commit to adequate defense spending levels at the upcoming NATO summit in Hague. Fortunately, NATO continues to face serious threats with security. The Trump administration, its policy toward NATO, has been inconsistent and chaotic. It's no wonder that the alliance is confused about where Trump and the cabinet are on these critical issues. On the war in Ukraine, Trump's Secretary of State said Russia started it. Meanwhile, President Trump said Ukraine started it. Trump's Secretary of the Treasury says Putin is a war criminal. Trump's chief negotiator of Russia, Steve Witkoff, said Putin started a bad guy, and this is trustworthy. Secretary of State often said Putin is a war criminal. When questioned to excel, Secretary of State will say that. At the United Nations, the Trump administration banned our allies on a resolution citing Russia, Belarus, and North Korea. It's so wonderful Trump's ambassador to Ukraine would respond, citing policy disagreements. We approach the 7th NATO summit in Hague later this month. The administration must take advantage of the opportunity and set the right straight. First, the administration must not step back from the strategic role in NATO. Proposals have been in the stream come into the European position or reduce the focus that's there in four Western Europe. Because any of this will do nothing but harm the deterrent effect of our alliance. Second, the Trump administration will continue to encourage allies and partners to spend more in defense. I know this is bipartisan, and I want to thank Secretary General Ruggiero, as well as Secretary General, former Secretary General Stoltenberg, and Ambassador Smith for work on doing this in the previous administration. Third, the Trump administration has clear the upcoming NATO summit that the United States and the entire alliance is prepared to increase the costs on Russia for its ongoing war of aggression in Ukraine. This must start with acknowledging effects on the ground, something that the Secretary of State will do when testified before the committee last month. This includes telling the truth. Russia is the aggressive state. Vladimir Putin is a war criminal who carried out atrocious crimes in Ukraine, including the kidnapping of 20,000 children. And the United States must hold criminal accountable for this war and the horrific crime Russia has committed in its way. Anything less represents failure of American leadership and inability to uphold key American values. Finally, the Trump administration must build upon the prior administration's efforts to expand NATO's relationship with the Indo-Pacific countries. Russia's war in Ukraine has a direct implication on the Taiwan Strait, and enduring a robust relationship with our Indo-Pacific allies is vitally important for this transatlantic relationship. I think our witnesses again being here, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. We are pleased to have a distinguished panel of witnesses before today on this topic. I was extremely impressed with the written testimony of all three. I'd like to start and introduce Rear Admiral retired Mark Montgomery, CTI Senior Director and Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracy. Sir, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Chair, myself, Ray Keating, Service Member of the Committee on behalf of the Foundation for Democracy. Thank you for having me here to testify. Look, we're here to discuss the future of NATO, an alliance that successfully led democracy through the Cold War and U.S. triumph over the Soviet Union. And I think that while the political, security, economic dynamic have changed markedly over the past 30 years, I firmly believe that NATO can still serve as organizing principle that guides the transatlantic alliance through the challenge posed by a really rapacious authoritarian state, Russia, as well as the Chinese-led axis of aggressors that really supports and enables Russia. Far too long, many of our NATO allies ignored these threats. They failed to invest in the alliance. Chairman Tell showed you that. They even failed to invest in their own defense, and warnings by successive Republican and Democratic presidents went unheeded for 30 years. However, that's denied Putin's violent military aggression against Ukraine and the persistent efforts of unbound Democratic governments in Balkans and throughout Eastern Europe. And combined with President Trump's vocal complaints about European defense spending, we are starting to see NATO members finally stepping into the flight. I too appreciate Secretary General Mark Rutte as he's direct NATO member. He anticipates now that NATO members will agree to increase the defense spending target to 5% of gross domestic product (GDP) at the NATO summit in June. This increased spending is essential, and President Trump has been right to call out pre-European apathy on this issue. That reason is because Russia and Chinese threats challenge the territorial integrity, democratic stability, and economic prosperity of NATO. Neither Russia nor China will cajole or coddle in compliance or even peaceful coexistence, and with Europe and America need to recognize that we're in a long-term fight with the acts of aggressors. But between these two authoritarians, chief threat to peace and democracy in Europe is Russia. Putin is not a misunderstood regional leader or an aggrieved actor reacting to data expansion. He's a stone cold killer. He's launched wars of conquest, invaded neighbors 3 times in the past 20 years. He's ruthlessly and violently crushed the democratic movement growing against hinterland, and he is currently harassing, torturing, and murdering his domestic critics. If we don't prevail against this Russian menace, it is going to need U.S. leadership. It isn't any European investments, and it's going to need collective action to punish its adversaries. My right testimony for 10 occasions to achieve success, I highlight 5 of them here. First is one Chairman Tell highlighted. We will establish and maintain NATO defense spending targets at 5% of GDP. NATO's national governments, even those not within range of Russia's long-range fires, must commit to Secretary General Rutte's proposed spending pledge of 3.5% of GDP on defense and another 1.5% on defense enablers like their industrial base, infrastructure protection, cybersecurity, to include the United States. Second, we need to act to protect critical infrastructure essential to NATO's own mobility. Moving troops and equipment efficiently over land, sea, and air is essential to NATO's ability to protect power and state forces to fight in our wars. European countries must prioritize critical infrastructure spending to align with NATO's war plans, not domestic ones, particularly as it relates to deploying U.S., UK forces into and through Europe. Third, we need to maintain U.S. enablers to force Western Europe. NATO's strength matter how quickly it can move feet. That speed depends on U.S. enablers, strategic lift, our operational logistics, our intelligence, our command control infrastructure. These are capabilities no other NATO ally can provide. That's why forcing U.S. forces equipment across Europe is essentially NATO's warfighting capacity. The answer to this challenge from Russia is not for America to do less, but for Europe to do more. Fourth, we need to arm Ukraine to defend itself and survive, and not board Ukraine to agree to an unacceptable ceasefire, negotiate or address, or even worse, to lose the war. And Ukraine needs 2 things above all else. First, they need constant U.S. intelligence support, and second, they need access to American-made munitions for them or for Europe to purchase. And if we have to punish Russia for its aggression, Putin will only change the calculus if the cost of continued war becomes unsustainable for him. The United States must increase pressure and pose hard on Russia to ramp up sanctions on Russian war machine, starting with its energy revenues and the shadow fleet of fossil fuel loaders that support that. And someone, I think, we need a comprehensive transatlantic effort, defend like the challenges, resilience to withstand assaults from adversaries, and a clear commitment to the alliance. If we have those 3 pillars in place, the United States and European allies will once again prevail over forces that threaten peace and security, both in Europe and globally. Thank you for that opportunity to testify. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Admiral. We had a clock malfunction just like they do in basketball games, but thank you for your testimony. Now to introduce Dr. Niall Gardner, Director of the Margaret Thatcher Center for Freedom, Bernard and Barbara Lomas Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Welcome, sir. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
My name is Niall Gardner. I'm the Director of our Center for Freedom Foundation. View my present destiny, our own, more must say, our summary from written statement. NATO remains the essential force that holds back the Russian bear on its eastern flank and keeps in check the imperialist ambitions of that Putin's murderous regime. Its role is vital in the defense of Europe against Russian aggression. Without NATO, the reality is that Russian forces would very likely be willing to involve states and deep in Europe. We should underestimate Putin's level intentions and his desire to conquer further territory in Europe. To sustain the alliance, American NATO allies must fully participate in bird sharing with the United States. The Trump president is rightly applying pressure on American allies to do far more to foster true partnership rather than dependency, especially as the US must increasingly focus on the immense threat from Thomas China in the Indo-Pacific. This cannot be a two-tier alliance where the United States has overwhelming military burden for the defense of the free world, while some European allies build vast welfare states. In 2024, only 22 NATO members sent to GDP on defense agreed to buy the alliance in 2014. This is hugely irresponsible. This includes the biggest nation in the NATO, including Italy, Spain, and Canada. Last year, Canada embarrassingly sent us 1.4% of GDP on defense, a shockingly low figure for the world's 10th largest economy. As Heritage Foundation research has shown, European NATO members have collectively unfunded road defense by $827 billion since 2014, nearly equal to the entire annual US defense budget. This is a staggering figure. As NATO leaders gather shortly in The Hague, there is, however, growing pause for optimism. President Trump's tough love strategy has made a tremendous impact. In just the first few months of his presidency, Dr. has already significantly strengthened the resolve of the NATO alliance. President Trump is not the destroyer of NATO, as the critics say, but the saviour of NATO. Trump's presidency is a wake-up call for a complacent alliance that had been sleepwalking to decline and possible self-destruction. Thanks to US leadership today, which was slightly absent under Joe Biden, who was bearing command on the world stage, the complacency of past decades has been thrown out the window. Since Donald Trump took office in January, there has been a dramatic change of approach among our third-world NATO partners, including Europe's economic powerhouse Germany, where nearly every European NATO member announced plans to significantly increase defense spending, enhance overall military capabilities, and grow the defense industrial base. This is true of the Trump effect in action across the Atlantic. Words not enough. It's time for all American NATO allies to make a firm commitment to immediately match America's current spending level of 3.5% of GDP and push to raise defense spending to 5% of GDP. The US also cannot allow NATO to be undercut by grandiose visions of the European Union army that would split the alliance and divert vital resources away from NATO. One of the big threats to the future of NATO posed by French President Emmanuel Macron's call greater strategic autonomy for Europe, moving away from the United States and moving closer to an accommodation with Beijing. The United States must fight the full delusion that Europe should rest upon delusional ideas of a militarily powerful EU, which would replace NATO-based cooperation with Brussels-based nationalism. Macron's perilous rhetoric, exactly what Russian President Vladimir Putin and Chinese Premier Xi Jinping wish to hear. The US should also strongly oppose a massive, reckless, and incredibly dangerous decision taken by Britain's socialist government led by Islam to hand over direct control of Chagos Islands to Russia's opposed Chinese ally. The islands are home to the vital Anglo-American military base of the Chagos Sea. This has made it difficult to China at Britain's expense and greatly undermines US strategic interests and NATO cohesion. Chagos surrenders the worst foreign policy move for British colonialism era and a betrayal of the US-UK ratio. In conclusion, the United States has a significant national interest in forming a strong NATO alliance. A secure Europe is a robust transatlantic alliance, great advance in security of the American people. American exceptionalism is the most powerful force of liberty in the world today. It creates strength of America's alliances, and NATO is at the very heart of the transatlantic partnership. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I recognize the Honorable Julianne Smith, former U.S. Permanent Representative in NATO, the U.S. State Department. Recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Self, Ranking Member Keating, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity today to speak to you about NATO. For more than 75 years, NATO has been the bedrock of transatlantic security. From the Cold War to the Balkans, from counterterrorism to cyber defense, the alliance has consistently adapted to meet new challenges. Yet NATO's enduring strength lies not only in its military might, but in the shared values of its members and their collective commitment to defend one another. For these half decades, NATO has superbly served both U.S. and European interests by keeping the peace in Europe, which allowed our economies to boom. In recent years, NATO has undergone one of its most significant transformations in decades. In response to Russia's vicious invasion of Ukraine, the alliance has shown historic unity and resolve. Every single member of the alliance has offered economic, humanitarian, or military support to Ukraine, and NATO launched a new NATO-Ukraine Council to enable Ukraine to sit at the table as an equal partner. NATO also welcomed 2 new members, Finland and Sweden, and on the eastern flank, NATO established 4 new multinational battalions, bolstering the alliance's forward defense posture from the Baltic to the Black Sea. At the same time, NATO has expanded its partnership in the Pacific that reflects our shared recognition that security challenges like cyber attacks are increasingly global. In 2022, NATO mentioned China in its strategic concept for the very first time. And most critically, we have seen a striking rise in European defense spending. Allies are investing more in their own security. Today, 20 allies spend 2% of their GDP on defense, up from 6% just 4 years ago. The momentum is set to accelerate. Later this month, NATO leaders will gather in The Hague for their annual summit. Allies are expected to announce a new commitment to spend 3.5% of GDP on hard defense and another 1.5% on related items like infrastructure. This is very good news. For decades, Europeans have underinvested in their own security, and due to Europe's generous military support to Ukraine in recent years, the current capability gaps in Europe are acute. We should celebrate this progress, but we must also be clear-eyed about some of the associated challenges, and let me mention just 3. First, more money alone will not fix the fragmentation of Europe's defense industrial base. Without meaningful work to coordinate procurement, standardized requirements, and deep defense industrial cooperation, this influx of funding runs the risk of simply reinforcing the inefficiencies that have long plagued European defense. Consider tanks. Unlike the U.S., which fields a single main battle tank, the M1, NATO's European members have more than a dozen different types of tanks. This kind of fragmentation complicates joint operations, undermines NATO's cohesion, and slows production and procurement. NATO must ensure that increased spending leads to increased capability, not just duplicated or siloed efforts. Second, spending needs strategy, and right now, the alliance lacks a coherent approach to dealing with Russia beyond deterrence. NATO's long-term posture remains unsettled, and so do our collective objectives regarding Moscow. NATO allies created a plan to tackle such questions when they committed last year to unveil a new Russia strategy during this year's summit in The Hague. The alliance paused work on that strategy for fear that it might not reach consensus in the current political climate. That was a mistake. Without a clearly articulated and forward-looking Russia strategy, we risk losing the political rationale for sustained investment. Finally, the alliance today is grappling with a growing trust deficit, which is quietly shaping the way that allies approach increased defense spending. Many European governments worry that U.S. support for NATO is now conditional and subject to sudden shifts. Some allies worry about a U.S. shift away from support for Ukraine. These new uncertainties are leading allies to hedge their bets. Instead of making bold, long-term investments in shared NATO capabilities or better co-production efforts with the United States, some allies are focusing solely on capabilities made in Europe. Unless this trust gap is addressed directly with steady U.S. leadership, transparency, and a shared strategic vision, American security will be undermined and the alliance as a whole will risk missing the full potential of the current momentum. In sum, NATO remains the most successful military alliance in history and is crucial to both U.S. and European security. But the way we manage this moment will define the next generation of transatlantic security. We must lead with vision, principle, with humility, and we must invest wisely and anchor our efforts in strategy and solidarity. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much for very strong testimonies. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. I want to start with what I think is one of the most unstable areas of NATO, and that is in the Western Balkans. As you know, or may not know, General Cavoli told me in my recent visit with him that Bosnia and Herzegovina could collapse overnight. And you may remember back in 1999, NATO, and actually their first operation, went to war for bombing Serbia. We now have, and if you look at the map, you have Slovenia, you have Croatia, there's Bosnia, there's Montenegro, there's Albania, there's Bulgaria, there's Romania, surrounding 3 entities that are not part of NATO. Everyone I just saying are part of NATO. You've got Bosnia and Herzegovina, that's led to the Croat Muslims in the Republic of Serbia. You've got Serbia, and you've got Kosovo. Kosovo wants to be. The president tells me NATO membership of Kosovo is the most important issue for Kosovo. And we have 4 NATO members, some of whom actually were in NATO back in 1999, that participated in protecting Kosovo from Serbia. Now, we got, I would like to start with you, Carter. What can we do to bring more stability to the Western Balkans, which is a flashpoint, has been historically and traditionally a flashpoint, to bring stability to the Western Balkans through admitting Kosovo into NATO? Is that a viable solution?
Thank you very much for the question, Sam. And I think the situation in the Balkans today is one of upheaval, ongoing crisis, especially the country of Bosnia and Herzegovina, where you have a fundamental lack of national sovereignty determination. You have, in effect, sort of European elite that rules over Bosnia and Herzegovina. And we need to see, I think, the restoration for sovereignty self-determination. And I think that as long as you have this EU-driven league that actually, in fact, controls the mission, you're not going to be able to move forward. And I think trend tensions exist within the region. With regard to Kosovo, I think great steps have been taken in terms of advances within the nation. They clearly seek to be part of the NATO alliance. I think that with regard to Kosovo, there has been a lot of positive developments. I think we'll have to assess how things move in coming months and the next few years or so. But I have to say that there's great optimism with regard to the broader outlook for Kosovo and for future participation in NATO. I do remain optimistic on that.
Thank you.
I guess I'm more aggressive to say I think Serbia and the Republic of Turkey are both bad actors who place all instability at risk. I think the leaders which could do it are thugs who are intentional. I think would is try to make the Republic a larger interest and which has aimed on eliminating the Kosovo sovereignty. Our response needs to be strong. We support KFOR, the NATO force that's in Kosovo, a stabilized force, which is properly equipped and enabled with European American support. Most importantly, we do need to move Kosovo along the path to further European integration through both the European Union and NATO. And the United States needs to use its significant power to push countries like Spain who oppose this and doing the right thing and allow Kosovo to enter the broader European environment.
Thank you. Adler, I need to make one more point. I appreciated your point about more money does not mean our industrial base is sufficient. And you pointed out the European industrial base, but our own industrial base needs to reform and re-adjust as well. Would you like to comment on that in my last 20 seconds?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for raising those two Balkans just quickly. This is region to and from the three corners of the world, NATO has already engaged. The European Union must engage to continue to pursue diplomatic efforts to work towards peace, and the U.S. needs to show up and be present and engage. If not, Russia and China are waiting the wings, playing a very active role in that neighborhood, trying to divide the folks in the region and by Europe from the United States.
Thank you, Mr. Mizab. So, time to time, I will have that question sent to you in writing. And now we're recognize Mr. Keating. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ambassador, I was curious to, I think this is worth ending. The U.S. commitment to Ukraine just isn't on NATO. And we're dealing with continued nuclear threats, particularly Iran. We know the danger of those threats. A decade ago, it was commitment made to Ukraine. Can you talk about the U.S. commitment to Ukraine before and why that commitment was so important?
So there have been multiple, thank you, Ranking Member Keating, there have been multiple commitments to Ukraine over the years. First and foremost, the NATO alliance promised in 2008 that Ukraine would become a member of the alliance, but Ukraine has also gone through its own process of ridding itself of any sort of nuclear weapons program with the hope that the United States and other countries would come through its aid.
How with that? I mean, it was the U.S.
It was significant, not on the scale of Russia, but this was an arsenal that would have, had it remained, served as a very effective deterrent to Russia's aggression that we saw unfold in February.
Before even this. That commitment said the U.S. would defend aggression against Ukraine.
Indeed.
So here we are, and now we have NATO allies joined. I'm curious, how many times has Article 5 been implemented by it?
Only once, sir, and that was, of course, after 9/11.
So, we all benefited, but indeed, I was in Afghanistan and Iraq. I saw NATO soldiers. I saw them defending, many times popular in our own countries, the U.S. defense in that regard. I'm curious, too, if Putin is successful in Ukraine, Admiral, what would it mean for U.S. investment? We're talking a lot about money here. What about the cost of being successful in Ukraine? What would NATO, what would the United States use to how to deploy in Eastern Europe, and how expensive would that be?
If he's successful in Ukraine, I don't think he will be, but if he's successful in Ukraine, it would put immense pressure on the Baltic states of Poland. The area that he would like to grab there is very easy. So for us to counter that, it would take, we already have brigade in Poland, it would take division in Poland. We have ties in the Baltic states, it would take brigades in the Baltic states. In other words, at a time when we are considering doing our footprint in Europe, we actually have to significantly increase at least the rotational forces.
Can you say in your experience, deployment troops far more expensive than assets?
It is, yes, sir. It would be a lot more expensive than the $34 billion worth of weapons.
And talk about need for our own country to better in terms of procurement and dealing with our assets. But wasn't it, in fact, we were in a period of modernization in our own country among services as well. So we were modernized, and many of these updated by our perspective assets were so useful to Ukraine. And wasn't the investment of U.S. dollars, most of that money stayed here. Is that true? Most of it stayed here in dollars and modernized our own. So we benefited by this investment, not just Ukraine.
Absolutely. In many cases, Europeans have been purchasing equipment in the United States from our defense industrial base to send to Ukraine, as well as they've purchased it for their own use after they've donated more dated equipment to Ukraine. So these contributions have come back to the United States. America's own commitments, the money that's been dedicated to Ukraine, has gone into building out our own capabilities as we donated us.
And how important from the United States is to be consistent? You know, I listen to some people to the comments of Orban in Hungary, and the thing he's saying, how important is comments by someone like Orban in Hungary?
Well, it is disturbing to hear comments from our friends in Hungary that have very mixed views on supporting Ukraine. They have found some smaller ways to support Ukraine, but this has been challenged across the alliance to maintain that unity. The key to it has been U.S. leadership. And when U.S. leads, brings the allies together.
Would you say a savior of NATO would say you're on your own, go it alone?
No.
Thank you, and I recognize the representative from Ohio, Mr. Davidson.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, witnesses. Appreciate the time of hearing today. Well, it works, just not well. So, if the sound back you split up, that'd be right. So, let me start over. So thank you for the hearing, it's timely, and I would ask the name of Vice President Vance's speech in Munich for the record. The administration sets foreign policy for our country, and the administration's been very clear where the Biden administration was. The Biden administration never would define the mission in Ukraine, but never say what exactly they want to accomplish. The Trump administration has been clear in Ukraine by saying we want to help restore peace. And that is what the President and Secretary of State and every other tool in the executive branch is trying to do, is to restore peace. You look at Vice President Vance's speech in Munich, he asked the fundamental question, what exactly are we defending? And not just territory, but ideas and values. And I think it's noteworthy because we see people from Western Europe claim asylum in Hungary, so they don't go to jail for free speech, for participating in a political party like AfD, or the now majority party in Poland, or one of the presidential election from the conservative party there. So you see values that are undermining institutions. In the United States, by funding NATO, essentially becoming the de facto security force for NATO, has enabled Europe to spend their money on everything but defense. We've served as their defense in the umbrella to which they extend their membership eastward. So we're pulling security while they're undermining the values that made us the West, the values when I was in Berlin, walking through Checkpoint Charlie in the days after 9 November 1989, that we said we were defending. And instead, it's the other way. So, Ambassador Smith, just to be clear, because it's a long discussion about Ukraine NATO member country.
It is not.
I didn't think so. Yeah, we reserved that. But we seem to keep treating NATO as Ukraine is a member of NATO. Should we make Ukraine a member of NATO?
The alliance agreed in 2008 and stated that Ukraine will someday become a member. Right now, there's no consensus across the alliance to do so.
There's clearly no consensus, and that's for good reason, because if we brought Ukraine into NATO, we would immediately be a still war. One of the things people like to refer to is Article 5. So, Ambassador or Admiral Montgomery, you said in your testimony that, quote, the U.S. posture in Europe gives no Article 5 its teeth. I worry that that can prove my point that it enables the European Union member countries to basically rely on America's bank of security in underinvesting in their own. And I guess at some point, your own view that Article 5 would obligate us to fight war, actually being immediately in a state of war, no member country was that.
Article 5, if it's an Article 5 violation determined by the alliance, then I think it's highly likely the United States would participate in that war. And I do think we are the, there's no doubt, our GDP is equal to all of Europe, so it's likely that we were all paying 3.4% under the Brexit saying us, but it's about 3.02%, 3.05%, but it's our offense. We don't say that, I mean, to be clear here, we're barely clear the number we want them to get to. But if we're spending that much, they're going to invest in that much, we'll be able to chart out and ensure that open fluid thing. My goal is not to fight Article 5, but we make clear that should you attack a treaty ally of ours, like Baltic States, Poland, we'll hold you accountable. And therefore, we see how strong we in Europe together. I agree with completely. Europe needs to carry the load, and Europe was apathetic for 30 years. But coming around led the East Europeans. Neither president has acknowledged that the East Europeans were spending 4 and now soon 5% deserve support the president told about the Baltic.
That's good, and I'm glad you acknowledge that Congress actually has the decision on whether we go to war. So Article 5 doesn't automatically trip it. My time is largely expired here, but I just want to point out that President Eisenhower thought that if we were in NATO for 10 years, that we would not succeed in the mission of NATO. So I think it's worth questioning, as Vice President Vance said in Munich, what are we doing here?
Thank you. And now recognize the representative from Nevada State.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. I'm just having a little different tack, which is information attacks and European countries that are in sensitive political context, and we've seen it in Georgia, we've seen it in Moldova. It's also extended to NATO countries like Romania in their recent election. And all these attacks are aimed at causing confusion. They deepen political and social divisions that destabilize societies. And the ultimate goal is weakening NATO, I believe. So, Ambassador Smith, I'll start with you. Can you tell us how NATO is working with allies, partners, and private sector actors to kind of identify, expose, and address and combat this foreign disinformation that's coming from Russia?
Thank you very much, Representative, for raising Russia's hybrid tactics. You have a variety of tools to try and divide societies from within and divide Europeans from each other and Europe from the United States. They fly into NATO airspace, they use disinformation campaigns. There have been incidents of sabotage where suddenly we've seen urgent attacks of warehouses full of weapons destined for Ukraine. We've seen undersea cables cut. So this is standard playbook on part of the Russians. NATO has increasingly turned to improving and strengthening its toolkit. We have better cybersecurity tools. We now exercise and train to test where we would hit that Article 5 threshold under some potential hybrid attack from Russia. We have better surveillance in the Nordic Baltic space, looking for incidents where they're about to clip another undersea cable. So NATO is the place where we can work hand in glove with our European allies to get a stronger and better toolkit to deal with Russian radar tactics.
I'm glad we're doing this, but at the same time, we're eliminating the Global Engagement Center. Can you address how that might work out?
Well, that's unfortunate because right now in the U.S. government, it seems that this administration is not placing any importance on those type of efforts to combat disinformation stemming from not only Russia, but Iran, from China. These countries work together to share messages, to learn from one another, and how they promote the pieces of disinformation. The U.S. traditionally has been a leader in helping allies understand how to counter those efforts. So right now, with the elimination of the Global Engagement Center, we will likely not be a big part of those efforts going forward.
Can I add on? The Trump did it with the Global Engagement Center. Congress did. You allowed it to authorities like fire last December. That's a aggressive state. But what Trump's issue does is gotten rid of the American, most of the other distributions, which is a mistake. I tell the truth about America for people to hear. I lived in the Soviet Union in the early 80s. Boys, American right for you, or you hear there, hear American stories. So I'm just going to demonstrate for that, but I don't blame him for global engagement done. You and Congress had to take part in December last year. You.
Okay. Well, you thanks to me. This should go here to you, Admiral. We're fixing to go to the NATO summit in The Hague. Now, we've got 2 allies as part of the world that's more attention, Eastern Mediterranean. So anything are happening in that area from Israel, Syria, Lebanon, you name it. We got 2 NATO allies there. We got Greece and Turkey. Greece is Turkey's not such a reliable ally. What's the message we should be sending to Turkey when we go to the Hague this week?
I agree with you. I'm glad we're sending these F-35. I think we should continue to be significant weaponry as necessary so they can do their jobs here in the aid and Southeastern Europe. Turkey is a strong decision. They should not be eligible for F-35 until they completely give up these S-400. And Brits in the administration is going to remove one little part, move one little part from this S-400, and then say Turkey can buy F-35. That's a mistake. Turkey needs to be held accountable for bad decision making on the S-400s and on their support for Hamas. And I think that's a strong message delivered by the administration in The Hague and elsewhere.
And I recognize the representative, Ms. McKim.
Morning, everyone. Thank you, Chairman Duff, and I'm Mary Getting for holding today's hearing. And thank you for joining us today. I'm asking for a question to Montgomery. NATO's ability to address Russia depends on robust and responsive defense industry base, where Europe's defense industry face critical vulnerabilities in supply chains, production capacity, and procurement strategies, as highlighted by Russia's war against Ukraine. And with some NATO allies still falling short of the 2% GDP defense spending pledge, but also limits modernization and readiness. So can you talk about the specific steps that NATO allies can take to address any vulnerabilities in your defense industry base, especially when it comes to critical munitions and advanced systems of production?
Thank you for being right. As we look, as we source Ukraine over the last 3 years, 95% of U.S. we were provided with U.S. equipment, but over 50% of what equipment provided by the European was U.S. equipment. They do not have an active defense industrial base. I don't believe they even probably conceive what's needed. It took you, Congress, 40 years to build their defense industrial base and trillions of dollars in direct investment. And the Europeans made those commitments. And I hear President Macron talk about a European solution to this. The amount of money he decides is way too low. So the truth is, the Europeans need to rely on us for the next decade to rely on themselves, and they're also going to need to build their own defense industrial base.
Specifically, this is how unity can help European allies in opening those shortfalls and at the same time to ensure the interoperability within our alliance.
I think we should take it right into the example of our Roman culture and artillery firms just partner with the United States U.S. firms so they can scale their production properly. So I think there's joint ventures between U.S. companies and European companies build both in the United States, but also Europe, with European money. That is the most logical, cost-efficient way, and not what Russia proposes. I think long-term, that's something NATO.
Next, I want to talk about Russia and China. In this one, you made it very clear that Russia under Putin is the single greatest threat to peace and democracy in Europe. You also noted the role that China has played in helping sustain Russia's war in Ukraine and providing dual-use technologies and economic support. So, China is bolstering Russia's defense industry with microelectronics, telecommunications equipment, and joint technology. So, in that context, how should NATO adapt its deterrence and defense strategy so they can address the combined military and technological threats posed by Russia-China partnership?
Exactly right. What I'm saying there is that Ukraine is actually from country right now. Russia, China, North Korea, Iran. And I would say most of the Iran space problems not it's China. China backs out in Russia's economy. They increased the import exports by 30%. As you said, they provided microelectronics to go on K-Trano into cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, destructing Ukraine every night. We absolutely have to hold China accountable for support to Ukraine.
Capabilities of partnerships and NATO should support to counter those threats.
So ideally, NATO's role in Asia Pacific will be very European, so we need to start working together on how we sanction and export control China properly. And we need to get Europeans more engaged in that committed as we are.
And one more question about the NATO and Western Balkans. Those forms is a critical issue for NATO's efforts to promote stability and counter external influence. Russia has intensified its efforts to undermine NATO and EU integration in countries like Serbia, using disinformation, economic leverage, and political interference. So what specific strategies should NATO employ to counter Russian influence in the Western Balkans, and particularly in Serbia, as I mentioned, and where the favorable position of Russia is growing, especially like in Serbia?
I think you're exactly right. President Putin supported both Serbia and Republic of we need fully support Kosovo and its efforts to enter the European Union and NATO. But more importantly, we need to ensure the stabilizing force and those hateful first and Kosovo is properly manned to do its job of the war that's necessary so that Washington can hold Serbia accountable with its Kosovo.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
I now recognize Representative California, Mr. Strauss.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I just want to focus on NATO and Ukraine. Let me first a reminder of a bit of history. When Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24th, 2022, there was strong bipartisan support that this would be good versus evil. Very clear, good versus evil. Let me quote from President Ronald Reagan gave in 1983. To know effects of history and of course the impulses of an evil empire is simply to call the arms race a giant misunderstanding. And thereby remove yourself from the struggle between late and long and good and evil. President Ronald Reagan, 1983. I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, members of this committee, that this is still about good versus evil. Bottom line. Okay? So, when we look at NATO and when we look at the United States post-World War II, we should not witness here that the United States, whoever's been president of the United States, World War II to today, has been viewed as the indispensable leader of the free world. Ambassador Smith.
Absolutely, Representative. The U.S. has led the alliance since it was created 76 years ago. It has provided not only
Indispensable leader of the free world. Dr. Gardner, would you agree?
100%. You don't see a sensible leader for reign. So,
Montgomery, what would you say?
It's absolutely, we should keep command of staff here. Part of that is essential.
So we're part of the similar moment in world history today as we look at what has taken place. Because Putin has been very clear, although the Soviet Union has imploded, he still has visions and dreams of restoring the Russian Empire. Does all three of you agree?
Yes.
Putin's been very clear in all his speeches here. So, Ambassador Smith, yes or no, do you believe strong NATO alliance is important to counter the rising and aggressive forces of China?
Yes, I do. Not to suggest that the NATO alliance is going to operate in the Pacific, but it's DNA partnerships with Japan, South
Try
Korea.
very carefully watching what we're doing in Ukraine. All three of you agree?
Yes.
Well, now we're going to maintain our commitment to our allies and to a democratic and free Ukraine.
Yes.
The world is watching, we do not say.
Absolutely.
So therefore, this is a standalone in American and world history with our NATO allies.
Yes.
yeah.
Alan Montgomery, the probable outcome of the support you've been recently in Ukraine, the F-16s, other support to ensure that, of course, we're all amazed, but we shouldn't be, because once again, we remember all the intelligence briefings we received prior to Russia's invasion of over expectations and under expectations. But the Ukrainian people are the drivers of this new type of war. Would you agree, Admiral Montgomery?
We do, and our use of the F-16 has been exceptional in the few months it's been operating.
And what should we be doing to ensure that those aircraft are fully operational and able to achieve their capability?
We give the F-16s the European budget that would call life maintenance. The consumables, the equipment, the training, and the maintenance stuff they need. We need fully vital life maintenance, and we need to provide weapon systems to use as a counter drone.
And our allies, the Danish and the Netherlands, have provided the aircraft. We're happy to train the pilots, but we need to do more. Is that correct?
That's correct. We need to do the supplies, and the logistics. We just sell to them. They don't give it to them. We sell to them. We have to provide that life equipment. And that's why we need to give them the counter drone rocket systems, APKWS, that need to fire in the system.
You wrote a comment this last week. There are very types of systems the aircraft are lacking that we should provide. What are they?
The rocket system I mentioned, active dam system.
The jamming system is very important for protection of these.
That's right. We want to make sure the pilots are trained in the United States and the aircraft, which have limited knowledge of United States, from Netherlands, Denmark, eventually Norway, survive. They're fighting them exceptionally. They can use more support for us.
Let me find the end date. When Secretary Rubio testified before the committee here about a week ago, they talked
apply maximum pressure on Iran to prevent them from obtaining nuclear weapons. By the way, I agree with that. And I urge the Secretary, why do we really put maximum pressure on Russia to ensure that they understand that we need to business organization with our allies? What could we do?
Should be sanctioning the shadow of the people who are helping the shadow fleet evade sanctions. In other words, Chinese, Indian, Turkish companies are taking the fossil fuels that are shipped from Russia on the shadow fleet and allow them to circumvent the existing sanctions campaign. The Biden administration, no administration, has probably enforced sanctions to allow that to happen.
And if we put maximum pressure, maybe Russia will come to the realization that we need business.
Frankly, he is Vladimir Putin, so I won't say yes.
Thank you. I have time, Mr. Chairman, and I will submit for the presence of the record.
And the writing is represented from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First and foremost, I'm going to disagree with my colleagues tonight. Ukraine is our ally. Ukraine is not a member of NATO. Aside from that, Zelensky hasn't held actual election since the war started, so I know it's free and fair democracy does that. But aside from that, we're looking at the U.S. total spending in NATO's 3.8% of the defense budget, which is a lot of money. My question, and I'd like to actually point out, I just saw two senators vlogging the Ukraine yesterday, was Senator Blumenthal and Grimmer, I said over the weekend. But the station bill with Graham is basically another DD project. The station Russia Act of 2025, there's a 500% tariff, and being banned Moscow, but where's the capability of how billions in part were spent? Biden admin shelled millions and millions of dollars into Ukraine with zero oversight, no audits, no results. Now let's put the $55 million for monitoring, while taxing 17 slaps tariffs on other countries buying Russian oil, which China will bypass through the parties. Trump's American policies does not protect it means double wins. And if Europe is not going to step up militarily, why should you use taxpayers fund their security theater? Stations without enforced negotiations are just performative politics. You know, I was just with the Democracy Partnership Institute. We were actually in Belgium. We went to the European Union members of NATO countries. And what I can tell you is you have these countries who are not surrounding Ukraine and they're advocating for war. But you have countries like Romania, Russia, countries like Moldova that want to eat and throw back President Trump's agenda. The reason I bring that up is because I do believe if we continue funding NATO in current capacity, we are implementing excuses not forcing them to take a realistic approach at these negotiations. My first question would be to Mr. Montgomery. You could just go back and elaborate really quickly on what you have said in regard to oil.
Yeah, right now the Russians are able to ship their fossil fuels in avoidance of their sanctions, which both the Biden Trump administration have in place by finding third parties. They ship them on illegal shadow ships, and third parties, US, China, India, Turkey, are receiving that. The way you normally stop that is you then sanction companies receiving that, purchasing it, a bank involved in the procurement, and then those companies back off. And historically, we see that happen with Iran, with North Korea, with others. So all you have to do is enforce the existing laws, the existing sanctions, and we'll take away Russia's funding Russia's military operation.
Into the performative politics. Correct. And I agree with you.
I think you do that regardless of sanctions going and then.
Cool. And aside from that, just without taking perspective, do you think that it's a good idea for members of our Senate, members of Congress to go outside posting that for the White House and Secretary of State in regards to policy with Russia and Ukraine?
I certainly feel it's fair for senators and congressmen to go on whatever government issue they want to support. This is my career, and I have no opinion on when Republicans, criticize Democratic representatives, criticize Republican administrations. My military knowledge appears to be a normal way to do business.
Do you think that it's dangerous to have people that are advocating for policy that's pro-war when they are first and foremost those on the front line, also the really massive contractor and defense contractor, not a contractor, massive donation sort of contractor?
I know Senator Graham, and I believe honestly.
So that's going to be a problem, not to now, but also Senate, not just one member of the Republican.
As I never hold politicians accountable for spreading certain views.
Sorry.
I probably should be able to express her views.
No, I understand, sir. I'm just asking. I think you're not trying to attack on this. I appreciate you being here. Thank you, man.
And now recognizes the representative for Rhode Island.
Thank you to our witnesses for being here. We know that the United States leadership in NATO is central to our own national security. We must support our European allies to take meaningful steps to ensure and increase their own defense spending capabilities. And we cannot hold away and isolate ourselves as the current Republican administration seeks. Maintain a strong leadership role in NATO and standing up to the biggest threat to our European allies, Russia's aggression. But Republicans on this very meet remain silent as Donald Trump scolds our NATO allies, habits who is talking points and retreats on the global stage. As Russian attacks are stepping up, Trump is step back, is not letting a finger to support Ukraine in their fight for freedom, sovereignty, and security. And Russia's aggression toward our allies to be seen in the sabotage of essential underwater technology and infrastructure. At least 11 undersea cables of Baltic Sea have been damaged in October 2023, including cables disrupting essential energy and internet services to our allies in Finland and Sweden. Ambassador Smith, could you explain how NATO is countering attack against undersea infrastructure? How can the U.S. support this war and protect our own underwater infrastructure from sabotage?
Thank you, Representative, for raising this particular issue. The splittings of or cutting of undersea cables is increasingly a topic of conversation across the NATO alliance, and allies have increased their surveillance, particularly in the Baltic Sea. They're sharing more intelligence, sharing best practices, and putting together a toolkit that will enable the alliance to fortify itself to these types of hybrid tactics. This is an area where U.S. leadership is indispensable, and if we continue to work through this particular issue through NATO, we'll see a stronger collective alliance response to these types of incidents.
Thank you. And this is an example where our adversaries, especially China, are watching NATO's response to Russia's aggression. Our response, our collaboration, our refusal to retreat from this task is a signal that I think is incredibly important. And this is on back of the response that we need to have to the increased coordination and cooperation between Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran as they form a significant threat against Ukraine and NATO. And so China's continued investments in critical infrastructure and telecommunication systems across Europe raises alarms about this coordination. And I'd love for you to share a little more about how NATO can and should counter the combined threat coordination between those actors, Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran, especially with the investment from China in critical telecommunication systems.
Well, this is actually a remarkable bipartisan story, and I guess there's not as many of those these days as we would all wish. But in the Trump administration's first term, they pushed the land to conduct a China review, put China on the map, got allies talking about what China is doing in and around Europe. Biden administration, rather than time, we were able to get China into a strategic concept, deepen our partnerships in the Indo-Pacific, and now handed the baton back to the second Trump administration. My hope is that this administration will continue to run down this path to heighten allies' awareness of what China is doing in Europe, whether it's economic coercion, disinformation, or fueling and helping supply Russia's war in Ukraine.
And I think it's one more that you highlighted the fact that the
sort of current context of the Trump administration and its questioning of the NATO relations. It doesn't have to be, and they've proven that through the type of collaboration and commitment that we saw prior, carrying on from administration, whether or not it's a Democratic or Republican administration. These are our values, American values that we share. And the last thing I'll touch on, and I may not be able to get your answer, but I'll check this on writing. What I want to make clear is that it's really essential that NATO maintain a unified position as a sort of and their new partners. I have questions in this moment, and if you could briefly, how should the United States and NATO approach member nations who are maintaining those ties with Russia that imperil the strength of the NATO relationship?
Well, Turkey is an important but complicated ally in the alliance. The U.S. needs to work with Turkey where our interests coincide, but in cases where we're at odds, we have to approach them with honesty and work through our differences, whether it's inside the alliance or in our bilateral relationship or in their relationship with Russia. I will say, on Ukraine, in that first year in 2022, Turkey played an important role in trying to bring the parties together. We've recently seen renewed efforts to do so, welcoming both Ukrainians and Russians back to Turkey to hopefully negotiate.
And hopefully that's the trend line that we see continue with that yield back.
I recognize the representative from Texas, Ms. Johnson.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And to our panelists, thank you all so much for being here today. I want to echo my colleagues and our witness comment that NATO's very existence has averted world wars and made the United States safer. Let me be clear, it's not a waste of resources when we come together as allies to defend one another, as implied by some other members of this committee. The security and prosperity that we have enjoyed since world wars is no accident. Out of the fog of war, the United States helped found the 8-year-old alliance to guarantee under Article 5 that should any NATO nation come under attack, other members will consider it as an attack against members all, and will take all action that deems necessary to assist. Article 5 has been invoked once in NATO's history, and that was on September 12, 2001, one day after Al-Qaeda killed almost 3,000 people here in our homeland. In the following years, our NATO allies came to our aid, and 1,000 troops died in combat alongside Americans. But now, we have a president who questions the same security systems we rely on to keep our own nation safe. Just a few weeks ago, he said in the Oval Office, you know the biggest problem I have with NATO? The United States is in trouble, and we call them. You think they're going to come and protect us? They're supposed to. I'm not so sure. I find these comments incredibly reckless and irresponsible and dangerous to our national security, and I the one time NATO was activated, it was in our defense. Ambassador Smith, how does this suggestion that NATO allies will not defend each other impact our adversaries' perception of credible deterrence, and does this undermine our own security?
Well, thank you, Representative. When the war in Ukraine started, I think both President Xi in China and President Putin in Russia made an assumption, and that was that the NATO allies would grow weary, that they grow impatient, that they grow distracted, and they would be able to maintain focus on Ukraine. But we have maintained focus on Ukraine. We remain united. I'm worried that won't continue to be the case. I want to see continued U.S. leadership, which is critical to alliance unity. And while the Europeans are increasing their defense budgets, it makes perfect sense to remain committed to this alliance. It serves our interests in addition to the interests of our allies. So I firmly believe that the U.S. should maintain its commitment to this alliance, and that doing so will send a very strong signal, not just to Moscow, but to China, Iran, North Korea, and other countries around the world.
And it seems to me like the administration is sort of doing hokey pokey. We're in one day, we're out one day, we're in one day, and we're turning it all about. And that is not a way to have sustained, reliable, persuasive foreign policy, in my opinion. Do you agree?
Yes, Representative, I will tell you that the day that the Trump administration suddenly, without consultation with any of our allies, flipped off and turned off intelligence sharing to Ukraine and all military assistance, it was eventually turned back on. But that day sent a chill through our European allies, our friends in Canada, who were worried that this now signals a new era where at any moment the U.S. can have sudden shift without any close coordination or cooperation with them.
The president just sent over a decision bill that will defund, remove funding, critical funding for the UN. I'm curious as to how the panel feels about the U.S. decreasing its financial commitment to UN and what that would do to our national security interests. Yes.
Thank you very much for your question. And I feel support effort to reduce funding for the United Nations because the United Nations deal with corruption, impunity, and criminality against U.S. national interests. And I think that the Trump presidency pushing for greater accountability from the United Nations, and that is absolutely right. And so,
how do you feel about that?
So, and I'm uncomfortable with this bill. The UN, more so, the reduction in USAID funding for particularly aspect of the cyber capability capacity building that we're doing in Eastern Europe and the Balkans. And I think the cutting of that funding, the reduction in that funding, will make it make it more difficult for U.S. forces to operate, to move in and through these countries as we look to with forces. So we have to be very careful with these reductions in our overseas assistance. If they have a legitimate national security value, they can be maintained. And when you eliminate 100% of everything, I didn't think you really did do a legitimate review.
I could agree with you more. Thank you all so much for your testimony. I'm out of time. Now you back.
With that, I recognize the representative from Illinois, Mr. Schneider.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for allowing me to join this hearing, and to our witnesses. I appreciate your insights. You all use similar imagery. You talk about NATO as the beating heart, the bedrock, the bulwark. That's very consistent. Ambassador Smith, you also spoke about trust deficit, and I'll paraphrase. Many governments are worried that the U.S. commitment to NATO is conditional or transactional. Are European allies right to be with the U.S.?
Well, I will tell you, having stepped back from Spain a couple of days ago and having the opportunity to meet with a number of allies across Europe, there is a real concern that the United States right now is unpredictable at its position both on Ukraine and on the NATO alliance is entirely unclear. We do not like that unpredictability and worry about whether or not U.S. leadership will continue.
As in tobacco, I don't want to left, but right word.
if I respond to that, actually, I've met with dozens and dozens of European delegations over Washington in the past few months and also some European capitals recently. And the message from our European friends is that President Trump is actually applying really high pressure on NATO on increase defense and do more. He's really shaking up the transatlantic line in a very positive way, and I know I've heard negativity all through.
I don't think this is a wise, and just like I did go to Poland and Afghanistan about forming our NATO allies, I think they have about a 5-year streak right now of being too unpredictable and too unfocused on the actual patient authoritarians staring in the face.
And they can govern there. I remember the images from bodies in the street, hands hiding behind backs, faces of ordinary people, men, women, children, massacred and cold blood. Russia's goal was not to see territory to extinguish the nation, to remind those still under its power that resistance has failed, and warn those who say to do not assure there was no ambiguity. It was terror, it was annihilation, and it was specifically staged for the world to see. The world responded. NATO reinforced its eastern flank. Our allies rose to the moment, and for the time, I would argue, so did we. But I think at this moment the United States is drifting.
not drifting, we're actually being led away from principle process. The president who may sign on Edward Reduce's campaign of trusting civilians is not condemned trustees, is not mobilized support. He has not led. And me and Congress, including some of my colleagues on the other side today, have followed that example. They speak of Ukraine's but shrinkments of a blockade, delay action, our platitudes, place of policy. Some have been taking political convenience principle. They lost both. We once again have to have strategic moral clarity. Ukraine is not asking for our troops, it's asking for a resolve. NATO would not demand escalation, it's asking for consistency. Each day that the United States hesitates, NATO's endurance is hesitant. And not only in keeping Warsaw, Talent, and beyond. And if Ukraine chooses to pursue NATO membership, as we promised in 2008, as Ukraine is part of an agreement to relinquish its nuclear weapons, is part of the family of nations, there has to be a clear and credible path forward for Ukraine, who has made sacrifices, who has bravely fought the Russians. We honor commitments and admit that NATO agreements open to free nations, not just Ukraine, but free nations who meet its obligations and share its values. So my question, I'll turn Ambassador Smith then. Boo would want clarity. The president didn't sign Boo. On the Russia's renewed campaign of drone strikes civilians. He told Zelensky that he had no cards to play in the Oval Office. I can only imagine what Zelensky was thinking, knowing there are plenty of cards left to play over the weekend. What does the president's silence communicate to our NATO allies, to Moscow in particular?
It has led to uncertainty about whether or not the U.S. is clear-eyed here about who is the aggressor and who is the victim. The U.S. needs to state repeatedly that Russia is the aggressor and Ukraine is the victim. We must apply more pressure on Russia to move towards peace. We also have to ensure that Ukrainians don't have any limits on the side of the forces, or whether or not they can build a future force so that this doesn't happen again.
Thank you. One more time, as we noted here, NATO came to the United States aid under Article 5 after we were attacked on September 11th. NATO has led the way in ensuring that Ukraine is able to defend itself against aggression from Russia. There is no dispute, should be no question. We have to be clear that that was the case. I appreciate what's the testimony in the elect.
I now recognize the representative from Delaware, Mr. McBride.
Chairman, I request 30 seconds to make a name in this statement.
You are recognized, Mr. Keating.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last year, you referred to Representative McBride as representative. I can't fathom how to continue to do that. In any case, it's obviously that Representative McBride wants to focus on the job she was elected to do. So going forward, every time you do this, you should demonstrate who she is, and you demonstrate who you are. With that, let's look back on the year.
Thank you, Working Member Keating. I am deeply about strengthening our national security by bolstering our NATO alliance, because democracy is under attack, both in the U.S. and around the world. NATO, grounded in shared cultural values of our transatlantic allies, is a vital role in democracy and staying in the U.S.-led democratic world order that protects our freedoms every single day. NATO has been a defender of democracy both at home and in Europe for over 75 years, fostering both one of the longest periods of peace between great powers in human history and greatest demand of freedom and individual liberty ever. On the global stage, this administration is attacking our NATO allies, Denmark and Canada, canceling foreign aid without notice, and defending who's illegal war in Ukraine. Most dangerously, this administration is undermining Article 5 and exploit ways. The threat to NATO and to the security it's fostered has been more insidious than just that. Here at home, we are seeing a democratic backsliding and dangerous illiberalism take hold. When the process is infringed upon, the First Amendment is trampled upon, we are not simply violating domestic norm and constitutional freedoms. We're communicating with Vladimir Putin that we no longer cherish the shared values that underpin our commitment to NATO. We communicate we aren't willing to defend democracy here at home, and so doing, we're not willing to defend overseas. That democracy and individual liberty aren't principles that we'll fight for. And this is part and parcel of a broader global project aimed at dismantling democratic institutions and shifting toward authoritarianism. NATO is and has been a crucial alliance for our shared national security goals and our shared values, and I intend to work with this committee, with your member in the committee, to ensure that we remain a leader and supporter of NATO's mission. So my question for you, and after Smith, someone who's represented the U.S. in Europe, I'm curious what long-term strategic consequences could arise if perception takes hold globally that the United States is retreating from our democratic values. How could that impact NATO's unity, position, and effectiveness?
Well, thank you very much, Representative, for that question. Look, the NATO alliance is rooted fundamentally in our shared values, and our shared values starts and ends with commitment to democracy, to the rule of law, to human rights, etc. And so if we have a situation where certain allies are starting to question America's fundamental commitment to those democratic values, the foundation of the alliance simply won't hold. So the United States needs to not only continue to ensure that it leads this alliance as it has done for now 76 years, but it has to be the beacon on those democratic values. Without it, the NATO project, again, simply doesn't work, and it would be ultimately a win for China, for Russia, for Iran, for North Korea, and others to see the collapse of those shared values. So the U.S. has a key role in maintaining them.
So I want to build off of that point, Ambassador, specifically around the message it sends to China and Russia. You might touch on in my open comments how receiving democratic norms and values and rights here in the United States would communicate with Vladimir Putin that we're submitted to values underpinning. So I'd love to hear your perspective on how the world in here, how that democratic backsliding here, it could potentially build in Vladimir Putin.
But we can't do anything, Representative, to signal to Moscow that we are backsliding on any of those core values, and we have to ensure that America's commitment to the alliance is ironclad. It is there. NATO is there to defend our shared values. We do not want to give Russia any impression that we're backing away from that commitment.
And then finally, in terms of NATO's unity, I'd love to hear a little bit more from you, Ambassador, about public attacks by U.S. leaders among NATO allies and how it's impacting or potentially impact what need to drive with NATO.
Well, look, we have been in this alliance for 76 years, and we argue all the time. I'm here to tell you, as a U.S. ambassador, I spend each and every week having debates, fierce debates, sometimes shouting debates with our close allies. That's the way it goes in the alliance, like family. Everyone feels comfortable arguing. But what you don't want to do is let those fierce debates internally boil over and give leaders around the world broadcast the feeling that no unity is cracking. You have to take those arguments head on, but work toward unity. And what I want to see is this administration reassuming and taking on that leadership role in the alliance, calling out Russia for its aggression and indiscriminate attack on civilians inside Ukraine, and putting maximum pressure not just on Iran, but maximum pressure on Russia.
Thank you. I'm for time to go back.
The ranking member's agreed. We'll have a second round. So I recognize myself for 5 minutes, and I've got to put you a question here. Dr. Gardner, you responded to that last, and I thought you wanted to give a response to one of those last questions. You'll take a few seconds.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I'd like to respond to the remarks made by Representative Bride, because I think the comments there were absolutely ridiculous. And the attack on the United States as a nation supposedly backlying on democracy, but in relation also to reality. I'm proud to live in freest nation on earth, and the United States fights everyday freedom and democracy across the world. And from the depths of astonishing, the member of Congress would compare the United States to Putin's Russia. And the United States is today a beacon of democracy and freedom in the world. And we see that on a daily basis. And I just want to mention on the record that quite actually appalling, a member of Congress makes astonishing attack on the United States, full of lies, that carry no relation whatsoever to reality. American leadership is incredibly powerful on the world stage right now. And the United States is leading the NATO alliance based upon the principles of freedom and democracy and individuality. We're seeing that. And we should be proud of that record. Instead of trying to tear America down, it's that does all the time. We should be proud of everything this great nation stands for. And they include at the very heart freedom and liberty that's at the foundation of this great nation. Thank you.
Thank you. And get back to some of the detail. I'd like your opinion, partner, of the arrest warrant of Dodik and the potential impact on the Western Balkans and the refusal to carry through that arrest warrant.
Yeah, actually, on that particular issue, I'm going to defer to my colleague, Mr. Montgomery, who I think has more detailed understanding of that particular issue.
Thank you. Now, I'm not optimistic that the arrest warrant will be executed. I am confident that Duke is a criminal and should be held accountable. I'm afraid I take share your kind of concern that raised questions that Balkans are under us, and that the inability to hold Vucic and Duke accountable is eventually going to lead to an inflation and a deeper requirement for European countries in America, United States, to get involved. So I wish it would be executed properly. I suspect it won't, sir.
Okay, very good. And we had a very short conversation about this Walk Gap. That is, in my mind, the second most important issue facing NATO. So would you give us a tutorial on this Walk Gap that Kaliningrad enclave and that enclave represents to Russia?
Was a retired armed from that, but I agree completely. The Vlaki Gap is a narrow throat that Russia would like to grab in order to bring itself, Greater Russia, Belarus, in contact with Kaliningrad Oblast, which is the most heavily fortified geographic position in the world. Despite the war in Ukraine, the Russians have not backed off one iota from packing weapons systems in there that hold Poland and the Baltic states at risk. The ability to close that, I think, 60-kilometer gap would be very rapid in war. But I believe Russians can do that. So what they learn in Ukraine, they will be able to do that. So I share your concern about the Slovak gap. This is one of those issues where Europe and NATO need to be thinking very hard how you persistently deter Russia from able to do that. I do not think you can get the weapons there 5, 6, 7 days if the effect will be lost by then. And the Baltic states and Poland share your concern.
My last point in my last 30 seconds is FMS reform. We have great need to reform FMS, and I'll just make the point on the record. We have still billions of dollars behind in weapon systems that Taiwan had already paid for. Saudi Arabia stands in front of Taiwan for the Harpoon missiles, having paid for the recharge. So it's something we cannot take our eye off the ball. Ambassador, you mentioned the defense industrial base. FMS reform, I think, is vital for the future of everything that we've been talking about. That I yield my time and I recognize Mr. Keating.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's a lot of misinformation, I believe, that is going around the U.S. And around the world regarding the commitment of NATO allies, European allies, in fact, the 50 country allies that all are working as one to defeat Russian aggression in Ukraine. I'd like Ambassador to could take time and straighten that out here. I mean, the contribution from Europe is extraordinary. So you take time and grasp some of those concessions.
Yeah, thank you very much. There are some folks out there that believe that the U.S. has been supporting Ukraine for these last 3.5 years, largely in isolation, and that's simply not the case. Our European allies have given an enormous amount of support to Ukraine. They have millions of refugees that provided critical economic and humanitarian support, but they have sent weapons. Some countries have sent them everything they had. The Baltics, the Poles, the country of Crimea, essentially all its air defense. These contributions have been critical to what Ukraine has been able to do to defend its territory against Russian aggression. So I completely appreciate your point. I think it's important for folks to understand that this has been an effort not just with our European allies, but 50 countries around the world. Secretary Austin, when he was Secretary of Defense, regularly convened 50 countries from around the world, including friends in the Indo-Pacific, to each month send more critical support to our friends in Ukraine. One of those meetings is happening today, and the U.S. Secretary of Defense will not be attending the UDCG, the Ukraine Defense Contact Group. That is a shame. In my mind, it's a group that requires U.S. leadership at the highest levels, and the United States started this group and needs to continue to lead it.
The contact group is essential, and in fact, it's a way to use leverage, their assets around the world too. And so I think it's critical in that regard. I also want to just touch the Russian elections that occurred where they voted to have legitimate control over areas of Ukraine in violation of every international law you think of. How would you categorize those elections?
Well, it's pretty short. It's Representative. It was a sham, and we cannot allow this to stand. We, in my mind, cannot allow Russia to come in and make these assumptions and claims that the Zelensky administration is somehow a Nazi regime, that this territory that they are currently occupying belongs to Russia, that they have the right to own Crimea. None of this adheres to Ukraine's very clear territorial integrity and sovereignty, and we have to continue to stand up and push back against those types of Russian assertions.
Speaking of elections, in World War II, martial law declared in the UK. They didn't have elections, did not.
Correct.
And someone from the U.S.
Yeah.
Constitution.
Right now in martial law, they are not holding it. Yes.
Because of Russian aggression.
Correct.
Their Constitution did not allow that if they don't have that. Is that correct?
Indeed.
I don't remember. I don't think we spent enough time talking about Putin, who he really is. You mentioned that in some of your remarks. When we're looking at this negotiations going on, negotiations is always a good thing. Talking is always a good thing. But how would we categorize Putin's response to these negotiations?
The offer to last week was an insult to President Trump. President Trump told President Putin several times, come to the table with a serious deal. And he told him, stop doing Vladimir, stop doing I thought there was a potential to kind of reasonable response. But instead, it was just a laundry list of every illegitimate Russian claim to Ukraine and every ridiculous request that they basically deneuter themselves, demilitarize, and take no Western support. It was an absolute insult to President Trump, who's given President Putin more than enough time to come to the right answer.
Great. My time is expired.
And now recognize the representative from Nevada.
Trump administration would not want to eliminate the global engagement center, but rather you point demonstration. That's what me. You might Congress and allowed it to expire. Now, the White House Republicans did refuse to include the extension of sunset in the FY National Defense Authorization Act based on some sensitive conspiracy theories. But the Biden administration tried to keep their work going by putting this mandate in the State Department's Counter-Foreign Information Media Election and Interference Office, RFIMI. Now, unfortunately, then on April the 16th, Secretary Rubio announced closure of that office as a way to, quote, champion free speech. Now, since you asserted that Congress failed in its decision to not reauthorize the GEC, do you also believe that the Trump administration failed in its decision to close RFIMI?
So, and I know it's difficult to do more research, and you already have written 3 articles condemning the closure of the Global Aid Center, and President Trump slowed this. I absolutely believe we need to counter this information. The closure of the Department of Justice, Department of Federal Investigation, FBI, and Department of Homeland Security's disinformation jobs was equally reckless by the administration. So I absolutely think we should be looking for disinformation. Russia and China are aggressively conducting cyber economic warfare and influence operations campaigns against the country. The one I think I say is the most deleterious, worst information operations campaign going on in the country is the use of TikTok. TikTok, you Congress properly banned last year. President Biden signed into law. TikTok is being used by China to change the social narrative of our country, given 180 million 18 to 35-year-olds who use it. The United States is not a great country. The China's suppression of Uyghurs is okay. The China's suppression of Taiwan is okay. The Russian invasion of Ukraine is okay. And the Hamas's terror attack against Israel is okay. TikTok needs to be banned. To me, that's the worst disinformation operation. I agree with you completely that we need a live global engagement center. I've argued for about 2.5 years now. I was just pointing out that the actual problem was Congress failing to reauthorize it.
I just wanted the record to clearly show who all was responsible for the whole conduct of the journalists. And if you weren't answering it the way I had hoped you would, I'd take things that you think my staff has to do my research to get right here on. But thank you for that.
Thank you, Chairman Self. And before you ask my question, Dr. Gunner, I have to take great offense that your people, honorable people, can disagree on policy. Question, Democrats' commitment and patriotism is unacceptable. I love my country. I know my colleagues do. I am committed to the country. Like Robert Montgomery, Ambassador Smith, our colleagues here, we take note to defend the Constitution, and we do that with seriousness and integrity. So I take great offense. We live in a great country where we can do the world. I am the father of a Navy veteran. Like Admiral Montgomery, he was a surface warfare officer, and we can disagree. We don't need to this commitment to the country. Admiral Montgomery, in your opening remarks, you say, and I'm quoting you here, firmly believe NATO can serve as a bulwark against that line through challenges posed by other nations of the right state Russia and China acts as aggressive to the British NATO position. I think my question for you is it can or is must it be at that forefront?
In my written, I said can, and in my oral, I said must, because I believe it must. I mean, look, there is no substitute for us. I agree with now in his characterization of President Macron's initiatives here. They're going to go nowhere. It needs to be us. It needs to be NATO. Myself, himself, whether served with NATO for 40, 50 years, it makes we are the bulwark democracy in Europe, and we're the only thing that is strong enough to defeat together. Europe has to spend more. We have to spend more. We're going to go low 3% and go spending GDP, not the numbers we from some agency in Canada. We're going to go low 3%. Over the next 2 to 3 years. We need to get ours on way we can fed ourselves.
And I think as you talked about, we need to do that in a coordinated way. We need to have a strategy, and a strategy follows a vision of the role of NATO, the role it plays today, but also in the future. What do you see as the role of NATO looking to the future?
Well, I would like to see Russia. I would like to see the land complete that strategy on Russia. I think existing in a world where the allies can't agree on a Russian strategy doesn't bode well for the future and this huge surge in spending. But from a more technical perspective, I think NATO can help drive co-production. We've heard a couple of great examples today. I often point to the case of Spain, Romania, Germany, and Netherlands come together with Raytheon to build a anti-missile for the Patriots. Those type of co-production efforts are the way of the future, and NATO can help that happen, but not if the alliance is mutually trust and Europeans feel that they want back away from us. So the U.S. has to recommit. The summit is going to be very important in terms of the signals the Trump administration is going to send, and it should, in my mind, allow the alliance to forward both the Russian strategy and allow it to push forward on this point under that I just mentioned.
I can more answer actually my follow-up question, which is the U.S. role. What is the impact of messages coming from the administration, the going one way on Monday and on Tuesday and on Wednesday? What's the impact of being the strategy and vision needed to achieve?
Let me give you just one example of where we are with public attitudes in Europe. In Denmark, they have created this app on your phone so that you can go to the store and find U.S. products so that you can avoid them. That's where we are right now.
I did a wedding in Canada last weekend, week before last.
It's not good. It's not good.
We went in to buy a bottle of wine. There was no American alcohol in the liquor store. We're seeing that. We're in Montgomery. I want to do last word here. What is the impact of that consistency in the U.S. if we're going to achieve the strategy you talk about? If NATO must lead what?
As a military planner, ran our plans, and you should be a commander operations in your specific to my career. And the one thing that any military planner operator wants is consistency. We need to have consistent, stable resources, personal plans, and direction for the leadership. And then the president makes the direction, and we need flex to it. But consistency is always preferred condition.
Thank you, and thank you, Act.
I thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony. Members for their questions. Members of the subcommittee may have some additional questions for the witnesses. I will ask you to respond to those in writing. I will certainly have one. Pursuant to committee rules, all members may have 5 days to submit statements, questions, and exchange materials for the record, subject to the length of the limitations. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned.
Shadow.